welcome our newest senator to the committee and thank him for all the work that he's done in the private sector at balancing budgets. And so, you're next, Senator Perdue.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I would like to correct you on one thing. If I had ever balanced the budget, I would have been fired every single time. We had to produce a few more dollars on the positive side than the negative side. So, but thank you. I appreciate the comment so far. I appreciate you being here, Dr. Elmendorf. I was not prepared for the partisan conversation this morning, but let me give you another take on my perspective. We've got a crisis. This financial crisis, however you look at it, is out of control. Right now, we have the lowest workforce participation we've had since 1978. In the last 5 years alone, we've allowed 4 million women to fall into poverty. 2/3 of small businesses aren't hiring or have stopped hiring or pulled back hiring because of the Affordable Care Act. The middle class is worse off today than we were 5 years ago by any measure. We have $2 trillion or more stuck in foreign banks because of our archaic tax system. I mean, we have $2 trillion on the balance sheets of the Russell 1000 that are stuck there because of the uncertainty coming out of this city. We've got a crisis. I just have a question, two bookkeeping issues. One, what's the total debt today? I understand the net debt is $13 trillion in your numbers. Talk to me a little bit about the trust fund debt and why we don't consider that part of our responsibility in terms of talking about total debt that we eventually, over the next 30, 40 years, have to make right.
So the measure of debt that we focus on, Senator, is debt held by the public. And we focus on that because we look at the federal government on a unified basis. That was a concept of budgeting. It began in the late 1960s. It predates CBO.
When we had much lower debt, by the way.
And by looking at the federal government on a unified basis, then financial transactions between pieces of the government or debts owed between pieces of the government, we don't give that priority to. So in our analysis, we look at the total outlays of the federal government, the total revenues of the federal government, and the amount the federal government has to borrow from the public to fill the gap between outlays and revenues. So we focus on federal debt held by the public, but we also do projections of and report to you other concepts of debt, including debt held by the public minus financial assets held by the government, and gross debt and debt subject to limit, which is quite close to gross debt.
So the $229 interest payment we have this year, what would be the total interest if we were paying the trust fund?
Well, so as you know, the trust fund is paid interest. I think our report may have that number, but I don't know it offhand. I think about $430 billion.
So the $18 trillion, which is the current gross debt, grows to about $27 trillion, I think, which is is growing at about the rate the GDP is growing over the next 10 years. I think that's right.
A little faster, I think.
Okay. So the question then is, if today our interest rates were at a historical average, between 5 and 6%, today, we'd be paying by my math over $1 trillion of interest. That's just not sustainable. So I would encourage the committee to look at the total responsibility we have to our taxpayers in terms of the total payment over the next 30 years. Second one is I want to talk about the baseline just a second. I understand the baseline budgeting process, but that works on the assumption that everything we spent last year is going to get spent unless there's a cut coming that's already been adjudicated. Is that correct?
So our baseline projections mostly follow current law, but there are some specific directions to us that are written into the Budget Act 1985.
I'm sorry. It is law, not policy, right? It's the law that...
It's current law. Again, there's some particular exceptions that are dictated to us by other laws in constructing the baseline projections, but it's generally current law. So if a tax provision is scheduled to expire, then our projections in general had that expiring.
I get nervous when people with numbers talk about in general, so I will have a one-on-one.
Well, I'm happy to run through some of the
we just don't have time now to get into it. Is there a possibility eventually, and what would we have to do in this baselining process to actually go in and do a zero-base look at this?
It depends what you mean by that, Senator. So we build up our projections piece by piece, and we can try to explain to you where those numbers come from, starting from zero. I mean, and if you think about appropriations, for example, current law has no appropriations for fiscal year 2016. It hasn't happened yet. But our baseline takes the level of the funding under the caps. But the Congress, when it thinks about appropriations, I think you and your colleagues mostly think about them starting from zero, and you decide how much you want to provide to something or something else. And I know when CBO makes its own budget request to the appropriators, we try to defend the entire $47 million starting from zero, and the Appropriations Committee can do as it sees fit.
Thank you. I have 10 seconds left, so just, is it possible for us to get what Senator Johnson was talking about, a good look at years 11 through 30 on Social Security, Medicare, future liabilities, unfunded liabilities with Social Security, Medicare, and pension benefits for federal employees? You make a rough estimate of that, I know, but can we get a good look at that?
Yes, Senator. So we'll send you right away our last long-term budget outlook, and then we're happy to answer questions about it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.